Good morning and welcome to another weekly episode of Coastal Drone Show. My name's Ian Wills. I've got Jen and Finn with us. And this week we're talking about FPV, or first-person view flying. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to another weekly live episode of Coastal Drone Weekly Live. My name's Ian. I've got Jen with me and Finn, and we are team of Coastal Drone. We are Canada's drone experts, and this week we're talking about first-person view, or FPV drones. But before we do that, I just have a quick update. Finn wanted to talk about safety assurance declarations.
So a couple of weeks ago, maybe about 1 month ago, we were talking about safety assurance declarations and some of the recent changes to safety assurance declarations. And one of the things that we talked about is that Autel, the manufacturer, had many of their declarations pulled by TC. Yesterday, I was doing a flight review, and the person showed up with a Autel, I think it was the RTK, so the Evo 2 V3 RTK. He rocked up with that aircraft, and I said, okay, could you fly this aircraft in controlled airspace? A question that I asked on the flight review. And he said, yes. And I said, really? So we looked at choosing the right drone, and he showed me the updated certificate of registration with the updated safety assurance declaration. It had the date as a recent date. So this happened. He said that he got the email within the last week, that Autel aircraft are now back on the roster, back on choosing the right drone as having a safety assurance declaration. So most, as you can see, they have a lot of different versions of the Evo 2 Pro V3, but all of them now have a safety assurance declaration, controlled airspace, and near people. I don't think any of them have over people.
Okay, so back into FPV. Let's go through, first off, an intro to what is FPV.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure if any of you have been on YouTube or looked this up, you've probably seen similar videos. I just grabbed 3 of them that I felt were all a little bit different. So the first video here, essentially, though, it was kind of a dreamlike video type. This person who filmed this kept it very simple. As you can see, it's very straightforward motion, not a lot of crazy turns and whips. And that's where I personally feel like they got this dreamlike video from. Feels very calm and relaxing. Obviously, most of it is scenic nature views, so quite
cool. And we'll
cool.
have links in the description and in the comments below for this as well. So one of the big things that you'll notice, like with FPV style, is the horizon is not perfectly flat. So as the drone is flying around, as the drone tilts, the horizon is going to tilt because the camera is fixed to the drone. So this is someone's taking off and then just flying along the terrain, low level, and following it.
The next video that I pulled, I thought was really cool. I believe it's for just showcasing a place in South Africa when I looked it up. Now, this one you can see a lot more advanced maneuvers. This person clearly has experience in this area. They have really cool transitions. This was a really cool video if you want to take a minute to watch it. But again, you can see these advanced maneuvers that they're doing compared to the last one. We're circling vehicles, we're diving.
This one, they also mix in both FPV style, and then you can see here, like this is a GPS or traditional like Mavic style drone shot as well. A lot of this FPV footage might have been captured either in other countries where the laws are different, or unfortunately, some pilots have no regard for the laws. That's not what we're condoning here at all. We're looking at the shot type examples, and we have to operate under the assumption that these shots are all captured within respects of whatever the local laws were. Like you're seeing foreign plates on these vehicles.
Yeah.
So they may or may not have visual line of sight regulations.
Yeah, exactly.
They may or may not have airspace or VO. We're going to talk about Canadian drone laws after we get through this.
Yeah, and I think that's a good lead into the next video. The video itself is really cool. I like the way they set it up. If you wanted to get an idea of how these people actually walked through their shot first and then planned it, but there is a couple of spots on this video they fly under a donkey. I don't think that's very appropriate. I think Ian made a really good point. I don't think that all of this video is very great, but again, I just wanted to showcase these people took a lot of time, a lot of effort. They went to their friend's place, wherever this may be, and then they shot this whole video. But what they did before was really cool. They literally walked frame by frame and talked about how they were going to plan it out, which I think is very helpful. And again, advanced maneuvers, you can see here, this was somebody's property. I think it was a friend of theirs. So
that's a one-take type video.
That's right, yeah. So they shot it all in one go.
Yeah,
which is why they planned it out. They walked through the shot first before filming anything. So
the idea of one takes are shots that there's a high level of choreography, right? There's a lot of communication and planning, but the idea is to fly through, like, say you're doing a business walkthrough or fly through. You want to start out the outside of the building, choreograph all your activity in the building. So the building's not empty and dead looking, but everyone is ignorant of the drone, right? Or
Yeah.
pretends to be. It's, as you can tell, kind of hard to ignore a screaming demon like something like this, but do the best you can to ignore the presence of the drone and have the drone fly through as smoothly and as slowly as possible. And then after the fact, you put in the sound to make it seem like you're just flying through.
The other good one take one is at the All-Star game in Las Vegas a couple of years ago. They did a one taker for the NHL All-Star game, and they had players like on the ice as well, and they came from the outside of the building and flew through the entire building with players
cool.
and stuff.
I should have thrown it into this because it's not just like for fun. Like CBC actually did a one take live. They flew from outside of the CBC headquarters in Toronto all the way up, because they've got this big atrium in the center, and they flew right up into the studio and then transitioned from that shot back to the live shot.
Oh, cool.
So I don't know if the one take was live, if they pulled broadcast from it. Take a step back here and talk about what is an FPV drone. FPV is by definition first-person video, right, or first-person view. What it means is there's a camera on the front of the drone, and the goal is to fly the drone from the front of the drone. So you wear goggles like Finn is wearing right now. Those are the DJI goggles too, and they wirelessly take the video signal from the drone, and then in your goggles, you don't move your head around. It's a stationary fixed video on top of your face, but that video then is a real-time transmission of what the camera on the front of the drone is seeing. So you fly focused on what the drone is flying towards, not staring at the video system on the front of your controller or looking at the drone from a visual line of sight.
So you're sitting in the flight deck of the drone.
Basically, it's to emulate flying, right? Both of these are DJI products. This is the DJI Avata, which is it's kind of a Cinewhoop style drone, so it has enclosed propellers. This has been modified, so it has aftermarket propellers. It's not the original config. And then this is the DJI FPV. It's just called FPV. This was the original DJI drone that came out late 2021. And it's a similar system. DJI also has a fixed camera that faces forward. What's unique to DJI, though, is both of these are on vertically stabilized gimbals. So you can see that the camera can move up and down. And what that allows is the drone can change attitude forward, and then the camera will stay constant. Or you can lock the gimbal in a fixed attitude or a fixed tilt, and then it will follow that as well. And the cool thing about this is on the fly, you can adjust the gimbal angle, which means when you're flying very fast, the gimbal can be tilted forward, so you still have a level horizon, or you can fly very slow and have the gimbal also tilted at a level horizon. So you have adjustable kind of performance on the fly instead of having to take the drone apart and mechanically adjust your gimbal.
Though this one also, this mount here, this is for a GoPro. So
Yeah, that's an aftermarket mod as well.
Is that an aftermarket mod? Okay.
It's it's designed for it, but yeah, it allows you to run a GoPro on top because the first generation FPV, the camera was good but not great. The Avata is better, but it doesn't have the performance and the margin to spare to run an aftermarket. Like a GoPro full size weighs about 200 grams, 250 grams. So it's a fairly significant payload. The FPV one, you just lose flight time. All the other functions, the safety assurance wasn't really impacted by it. That little tiny white one there is also an FPV drone. This is you could call it a tiny whoop. It's a beta flight. It came in a kit with a set of its own goggles for around $200. And it has a fixed camera. The camera doesn't stabilize itself or anything. It uses a tiny 1S or 4-volt battery. Very limited flight time, very limited range, very limited performance. You can see the motors on it are pretty much microscopic. But because it's well under 250 grams, you can fly it outdoors or indoors. It's meant to be flown indoors. It doesn't fly well outdoors. So any aircraft that's flown with the aid of first-person goggles is considered an FPV. It can be a fixed wing, a monowing, or a multi-rotor drone. That's what we're focusing on today. It's more popular in the DIY world than it is in the finished product. Like DJI makes a line of goggles though that are universally compatible with home built. So these are the DJI goggles 2, which came out when the Avata came out, goggles V2. But these you can buy standalone video transmission units that you would then plug into a home built or a custom built drone. So you can then have FPV added to an airplane, a multi-rotor, a manual quad, whatever. what are the legal requirements for flying an FPV drone? And this is specific to anything over 250 grams. Anything under 250 grams, it's going to be the same as any other micro drone. So no basic pilot certificate, like no certification, CARS 900-06, so the don't be an idiot rule. Don't fly in restricted Class F airspace. Don't fly against any NOTAMs that are published. And then you should maintain line of sight. You should stay below 400 feet AGL. You definitely should not fly in the path of airplanes and helicopters. And you definitely should not fly at 800 feet over downtown Vancouver. So let's get back to the 250 plus. You need at least a basic or an advanced. An advanced is going to have other requirements like the safety assurance declaration. So if you want to fly in controlled airspace, you need a drone that has that declaration. Both of these have declarations for GPS to allow in controlled airspace. They also have declarations to allow you to fly near people, so up to 5 meters away. When we're indoors like this, Jen and Finn and Marshall, our crew, we talked about it before, they consented to it. But because we're indoors, also those rules don't apply, even though it's just as dangerous to fly these things indoors as it is outdoors. And then if you're flying FPV with goggles that completely obstruct your field of view and you have no other sensory input other than sound, you have to have a visual observer. You can't just put goggles on and then fly your drone by yourself anywhere. So what is a visual observer's job? Basically, no pilot can operate a FPV drone using only first-person view goggles unless at all times during the flight, there's a visual observer that does the detect and avoid side of the role. So that means looking for conflicting aircraft, scanning the airspace, looking in the area surrounding where the drone is operated, not necessarily eyeballs laser locked on the drone, but on the airspace around the drone, and then being able to determine where the drone is relative to those potential aircraft hazards, right? So your visual observer is going to communicate to the pilot, hey, there's a Cessna coming. It looks like they're at 500 feet. They shouldn't be a problem because you're only at 200 feet. Or watch out, there's an airplane coming in on a forced approach and it looks like they're going to land where we are. Or you're too high, get back down below because it looks like you're close to the airplane.
Or there's a bird following you.
Yeah.
And you can't see it because you're looking straight forward.
Exactly. You can't see anything behind you or around you. So that's what the visual observer's job is. They have to be in verbal communication range with you. Their job is to talk to you and tell you what's going on. Some new cool developments coming, though, in the world of goggles and drones. We saw it a couple weeks ago when the Apple Vision Pro came out. One YouTuber, Billy Kyle, out of the States, demoed taking a pair of Apple Vision Pro goggles, pairing them to his MacBook, and then pairing his DJI drone feed to his MacBook using AirPlay mirroring. So really convoluted setup. But what it let him do was have a floating virtual augmented reality screen of his DJI drone inside his goggles. And the Apple Vision Pro has augmented reality pass-through. So in theory, you put the goggles on, it still looks like you're sitting in a room at 1-to-1 visual acuity to you around you, but now you've got a floating image. I've talked to Transport about this, and we agree that this is cool technology, and it's kind of up to the pilot to determine what the visual acuity is when you have the augmented reality goggles on versus when you have them off. And let's talk about that a little bit. So your job is to maintain visual line of sight of the drone. That visual line of sight is not eyes on the drone exactly the entire time. You're allowed to take your eyes off the drone to look at the controller while you're looking at the screen and then back up to the drone. Your job is to have awareness of the airspace around you and the surroundings and be able to identify drones, helicopters, airplanes, airships, whatever, flying in the area that could be potential hazards. So if you're wearing a set of augmented reality goggles that have good enough visual acuity that is about the same as what your normal 20/20 unaided or unimproved vision, so you can't necessarily run binocular or magnification. Like that's a violation of what the car's spirit is.
Just corrective lenses. So if you wear glasses or contacts,
you can get back to 20/20 vision. So if you're wearing these goggles and it's basically 20/20 vision and the latency is reasonable, it doesn't need to be perfect because the same thing, the visual latency from your controller is, again, something that's not, there's no hard spec in the regulations that talks about it. I've had many conversations with TC about this, and it's always come down to what's reasonable. And what's reasonable is if you can see all around you and you've got an unobstructed view and you're flying with augmented reality and you are smart enough to take the goggles off if you have any doubt, right? And you can still fly the drone safely, then there should not be a reason why you couldn't fly with AR goggles as long as the camera field of view, so when you're flying FPV, does not encompass your entire field of view. I know people in the film industry that use like Epson pass-through goggles, and it's just a piece of glass that sits in front of your eye, and it's not completely opaque. So you can still see past, but it gives you an idea of what the drone sees, so you can reference that, come back to flying visual line of sight, and then reference your FPV. So this is where it's going to be, there's going to be some flexibility in how it is. It's not a black and white interpretation. With the new regs coming in 2025, there is proposal to define officially what sheltered airspace is. And sheltered airspace, we've talked about it a lot. Like one of the common questions we ask in the flight review is, what's the maximum altitude you can fly a drone in Class G or uncontrolled airspace? Well, it's 400 feet above ground, unless you're within 200 feet horizontal of a structure, and then you can go 100 feet above the structure. Well, that bubble around that structure is sheltered airspace. So if you are within 200 feet of a structure, in theory, no airplane or helicopter should be dumb enough to be flying that close to that structure. So it's sheltered by the obstacle. So a tower, a wind turbine, a building, any kind of permanent structure that is plainly obvious should stand out as sheltered airspace. What I'm going to leave as a question that we can discuss in the comments about this is, does that include your backyard? Because we've always talked about sheltered airspace as like big structures, not small structures and like fences and stuff. So like if you're under the shadow of your fence, because we get this question a lot, well, can I just fly my drone in my backyard? Well, 2 inches off the ground in your backyard in Richmond is Class C controlled airspace. So no, you can't. It's controlled airspace. But now it's sheltered airspace. Sheltered airspace does not eliminate the requirements of the regulating authority above it. So if it's Class C, it's still Class C. But what it may eliminate, and what I'm getting at here is, it'll eliminate the requirement for visual line of sight of the drone. So say you're doing real estate is the intent of this. You're standing in the front yard. You've been asked to fly the entire property. Well, under sheltered airspace rules, you could go around to the back of the property, fly the property as long as you're within 200 feet of some structure on the property without having to physically trudge around to the entire side of the property. But, and here's the other but, the drone must have either a declaration that allows for this to happen or some sort of signal strength robustness that allows for it to not have a broken signal. Because if it goes into fail-safe or it loses radio signal behind the building, or it may go into return to home and it may climb up and over and then change the entire rule set, or you lose situational awareness. And the other but, you have to be an advanced pilot is the current plan for this. And you cannot fly near people when you're doing this. Near people or controlled airspace may or may not be allowed depending on the declaration because you've modified what the drone is potentially allowed for. So it's something to keep an eye on and discuss more like how that would be useful to you in your operation. But I can see it being really valuable for not only like line of sight, GPS style flying in real estate, but also for FPV. Say you're flying an abandoned building and you're flying in and out of the abandoned building, notwithstanding like you've got permission and or it is completely abandoned and open public property. If you're flying in and out of a building, that potentially is an option.
And if the rules change and become complicated, guaranteed I will ask about it on the flight review. 100% guaranteed.
Yes. Our intent when we ask a question is you learn something from the question. I want to reiterate that indoor flights are exempt from Canadian aviation regulations. They're not regulated by Transport Canada. And I pulled legalguide.com, I think it was. So I'm not sure if it's necessarily Canadian statute, but it's several definitions I found were the same. And I wanted to define what is indoors. An indoor area means all space between a floor and a ceiling that is bounded by walls, doorways, or windows, whether opened or closed, covering more than 50% of the combined surface area of the vertical planes. Keep that 50% in mind. It's not 100%. It's not a fully enclosed box. So the vertical planes are the wall space constituting the perimeter of the area. So more than 50% of the perimeter must be vertically and covered. A wall includes any retractable divider, garage door, or other physical barrier, whether temporary or permanent. A standard window screen is not a wall. So a fly screen, I guess, could be considered not a wall. But an open window, an open door, an open barn door does not constitute outdoors. So the reason I want to bring this up is if you're flying in a sheltered area, say it's a hangar and the hangar door is open, it is still considered indoors. Where the debate is, and this is another really good discussion point, like comments are going to hopefully bring up on this, but is it considered protected from a flyaway? And this is the debate that I've had in the past is if you're flying indoors, does flyaway consideration come into factor? Because there is a less than or more than 0% chance of a flyaway, but you'd have to be very specific about how you fly the drone. The drone would have to find the exit or find the window or find the door and then proceed on its own merry way up into whatever airspace it is. Mm-hmm. So at the root of it, though, you're unregulated because you're indoors. So let's get into how to fly. So the big difference between FPV and GPS or normal drones is a GPS-style drone will hover and stay in its one position in the absence of any flight controls. Now, the interesting thing is both this and the DJI one are hybrid drones. They have GPSs, they have auto position hold capability. They will fly like a DJI Mavic or a Mini, but they will also fly like a true acro mode FPV drone. So in normal mode, the drone will basically slew. It's like a flying tripod. So if I push forward on the right stick, it flies forward. I push back, it goes backwards, left, right, rotate, up, down, right? Very constrained, normal kind of flight. The Avata has downward-facing cameras and a LiDAR system, so it knows how high it is. That's why I was able to hover so smooth at the beginning of the video. That wasn't my talent or anything. That was just me not touching any controls. If I put this thing into manual, though, immediately in manual, the drone no longer has attitude hold. So the drone will drift in any direction based on where the position of the right stick is, which is now your attitude stick. Imagine it like the cyclic on a helicopter, which is the stick that you move forward and backward, left and right, or the control stick on an airplane. You push forward, the nose goes down. You pull back, the nose comes up, right? So that's the same on the controller. So the right stick controls your attitude. The left stick then goes from becoming your up and down speed, like on a normal drone, if you push up on the stick, it goes up very fast. You push down on the stick, it goes down very fast. If you put it in the center, it just holds in whatever relative position it is. So it's a rate of climb or rate of descent stick. In manual mode, you'll notice how this stick doesn't return to center. It stays exactly where it is. And that's, you can adjust the settings on this controller to put it into throttle mode. And when it's at the very bottom, it's zero throttle. So that means that the props in theory are not spinning at all. And at full throttle, they're spinning at full power. So that would be all four propellers would spin at full RPM. And then you control that RPM by adjusting the attitude of the drone. So if I wanted to hold a hover, I'm going to have to make sure that I'm controlling any kind of drift with my right stick. And then I'm adjusting the throttle to kind of keep it in center. What you can get it to hover pretty smoothly because as long as you don't have any wind or any kind of relative impact on it, it's going to hover fairly well. But if I want to transition to a forward flight, as soon as I go from this hovering position, and this is just like a helicopter, you've got this bubble or cushion of air underneath the drone, everything's neutral. So the force of pushing the drone up is like your thrust vector is straight up. But as soon as you tip it forward, it's not going to be enough to both keep it in the air at the same altitude and start moving it forward. So you're going to need to add throttle. So you start increasing your throttle manually and tipping the drone forward at the same time. So you've got multiple things going on at the same. Big difference between FPV and GPS is when I turn with a GPS drone, it takes care of banking the drone on its own. Some of these drones will automatically bank and roll, so they fly like an airplane as they go around corners. Whereas when you're in manual, if I tilt the drone forward, now my attitude of the drone, and I'm going to turn it sideways so you can see better on the camera here. But when the drone is tipped forward like this, if I want to turn it left, if I yaw the drone to the left, it's going to not necessarily fly in a good kind of coordinated turn. So I actually have to bank it manually and yaw it at the same time to fly around the corner. So what happens is on my sticks, when I'm flying the drone forward, I'm going to have a little bit of throttle, a little bit of forward, and I'm also going to have a little bit of a coordinated turn. So both the sticks are going to be turning at the same time. As Finn put in here, like when drones are in manual, it's basically attitude and power is where your performance comes in.
So this is the old adage for flying manned aircraft. Attitude plus power equals performance. The definition of attitude is the position of the nose and wings relative to the horizon.
Thank you.
So you put the nose and the wings, so the props off to the side, you put those on the horizon, and you set the throttle where you think it's going to be exactly, and you should hover. If you want to climb, you pitch the nose up. If you want to descend, you pitch the nose down. If you want to turn, you roll to the left, you roll to the right, as Ian mentioned, and then you control yaw with your stick. Attitude plus power equals performance. If you should have an expectation that a certain attitude will get you a certain flight characteristic.
Multi-rotors have a downward-facing attitude in normal forward flight because you've got your entire rotor system tilted forward. So when you roll or when you yaw, it's not over the vertical axis, right? Whereas the GPS drones, they fly like this. And there's nothing wrong with flying like this. It's just, it's not what these are intended to do. They're meant to fly like an airplane and simulate flight like an airplane. This is kind of where, like, how to fly FPV, the best thing we can recommend for you is to get into a simulator. You will crash, guaranteed. Every single drone, FPV drone that we own, I have crashed multiple times. It happens when you're flying FPV, you're flying more on the edge, you're flying close, like dramatic footage is when you fly close to things, right? So if you're not flying close to something, it's going to look more like traditional low flying. So unfortunately, what that means is there is a higher risk of hitting things, especially when you fly really close or you get distracted or lag out or anything else.
That's why the Avata has the prop guards. That's why Cinewhoop designs exist, so that the guards take the brunt instead of the props.
Yeah, and I have to say, so the first generation DJI FPV, so we haven't gotten into the hardware too much yet, but one of the big things with these was these were meant to be go to Best Buy, go to London Drugs, go to DJI.com, hit order, and you've got a full, complete FPV system ready to go. These are turnkey. They fly just like a Mavic out of the box, and then you can progress into manual flight. So you're not spending any time building, sourcing, going through, learning how to solder, do all that you need to do with a manual or home-built drone. The downside to this, though, is when you crash this, your repair options are super limited. You either need to buy new components, so any like crash could potentially be an expensive one because you've got to order proprietary components from eBay or from DJI or potentially use a care refresh. And the one thing about these is the care refresh coverage on these is very expensive because DJI knows you're going to crash it. It's almost a guarantee that you're going to crash it. So when they built the Avata, the second generation one, this thing is more like a brick. It's got a crash frame around the camera. The props have a crash frame. This is a single kind of carbon plastic unit.
Yeah, like if you take the battery out of the Avata, you'll see it's nothing. It's a frame. There's a circuit board in the frame, and then it's 4 propellers.
Yeah. And this is great, right? This is all you really need. It is a well-built drone. It is repairable to some extent as well. So the main brain and control is right down here on this little, it's like a 40 mil by 40 mil square. There is a very popular modification for this. That's called a 3.5 upgrade. These are 2.7 inch props. They fly at like 12,000 RPM or something ridiculous. That's why this thing screams. And these aftermarket ones, the reason I went aftermarket on this was the noise profile. The original props were giving me anxiety flying it. Like it was really loud. And so the 3.5 upgrade puts larger propellers and a larger frame on this. You throw the safety assurance out the window completely at that point. It's no longer a DJI drone. You'd have to redeclare it, but it quietens it up quite a bit, and it actually improves the lateral and longitudinal stability of the airframe because now you've got more leverage on your wings, right? So bigger propellers, farther spread out, you're going to get a little bit more leverage, but now the drone isn't as compact as this, so potentially can't fly through as smaller gaps. I've used a few of these. I spent quite a bit of time in DRL, which is a drone racing league sim. Velocidrone is also kind of more racing oriented. And then I've used Uncrash. I hadn't heard of Trip until this morning.
Yeah, I pulled some of these off a blog that I was reading a little bit. His name was Oscar something, but he has quite a few blogs. He had these suggestions, and then also with the crashing, he just said crash 100 times before you go and buy a drone. So I thought that was good advice.
So DRL is available on the Xbox and on PC and possibly on PlayStation, but you can use your Xbox controller. I don't recommend doing that for very long if you're serious about FPV, because the Xbox controller and other controllers does not have the same kind of gimbals that a real drone controller would have. So that's going to potentially not show you the precision that's available to you in the controls. This is a TBS Mambo. So this is a open source, an RC transmitter. And these are modular. So this module in the back is called a Crossfire module. It allows me to transmit on the 900 megahertz band for specific drones. But these things also have USB ports, and you can plug this into a computer and use it as a USB controller in pretty much any of these simulators as well. And this has really good quality gimbals. It's easy to work with. It's self-powered. You can map all the controls, so you can fly this exactly as you would fly it in real life using these simulators. And Velocidrone, Uncrashed, and I believe DRL does also support this. So that's going to get you into the habit of flying more precisely using the controller that you're actually going to use. So the first thing I recommend buying is a controller before you buy a drone. I have a 5-inch drone that has never flown. This controller has more hours on it than the drone will ever have, just because I've used this to keep my flying skills current. Like I said, this will work with pretty much any type of RC aircraft, so you can set it up with whatever you want. So it's a good investment. That thing was like $150 Canadian. So relatively inexpensive. These are actually more expensive. This is like $250. But Uncrash is a great one. I like Uncrash because it's actually really affordable. It's about $11 or $12 Canadian right now on Steam. You don't need a super high-end computer to run this. I run them on my MacBook fine. A friend of mine had an older generation MacBook and it ran fine on it as well. So if you see us at trade shows, we usually try and bring this out to give you a chance to see more than just the traditional like GPS style drone flying. Another way to fly though is, and this is kind of the intermediate phase, this is the DJI Motion RC. This is the Motion 1. It's the version 1. The one on the screen right now is the version 2, and it's got a little toggle because the Motion 1 only lets you fly forwards. The Motion 2 also has a trigger that goes backwards so you can fly in reverse. And the way this works is you hold the trigger to accelerate in forward flight, and then you move the joystick you move it like it is a joystick, and the drone will tilt forward, backward, left or right, and follow. In your goggles, you'll get a little circle that floats around in the screen, and you move the circle kind of like a heads-up display in a fighter jet. And the drone will then follow that circle. So it makes it very intuitive for you to fly FPV because you see where the drone is going to go, and then the drone goes towards it, and you just move the controller. And if you get crossed up or anything, you just hit the brake button, which is this big button right here, and the drone just hovers. What this doesn't allow you to do, though, is fly in full manual mode. In order to fly a DJI drone in full manual, an FPV or a Nevada, you need the FPV controller, which is a separate drone controller. This controller, the Motion Controller, will work with the Mavic 3 series, the Mini 3 series, the Mini 4 series, the Air 3, the Avata. The RC1 will work with the original FPV. The RC2 will work with the Avata. This thing is about $250 if it doesn't come with your controller. So again, these proprietary controllers are a little expensive, but they offer you some pre-built flexibility that you're not having to have a PhD in computer science to set these up or anything like that, because it is a little bit involved to getting into the DIY, do-it-yourself builds. It's not impossible. There's a ton of resources out there. Like one of my favorites is Joshua Bardwell. He has a phenomenal channel specific to getting started in FPV drone building and flying. And we're definitely going to shout him out in the comments there. But it is not an overnight thing to build your own drone, which is why DJI offers these accessible options for you. Most of the FPV racing drones are scratch built. You're going to need to source motors and propellers. You're going to have to size them. You're going to need a flight computer or a flight controller. You're also going to need an ESC, which is the engine speed or electronic speed controller. So your power distribution would be on that one as well. You're going to need a controller, an RC. You're going to need lithium polymer batteries. And of course, with DIY drones, there's a safety aspect of battery management as well that you got to think about. These are smart batteries that can be charged over USB. So they're relatively low risk. LiPos, they're charged by mainlining voltage into the battery and then balancing the cells. And that can be risky. You need to think about battery fires.
Mm-hmm. And they're also like, they're the same type of battery where this is a pouch battery, but this is in a plastic case. Yeah. Most of the LiPos you get is just the pouch.
You are going to need soldering skills. There are no solder DIY drone kits out there now that either have little clip connectors or screw-on terminals or something like that. But most kits that you source are going to be, if it's not already like RTF or ready to fly or pre-built, you're going to have some soldering involved. And if you want to fly the drone in controlled airspace, you need to add a GPS if it doesn't already have one, because that's one of the core requirements to getting a safety assurance declaration for controlled airspace. So here's kind of a rundown of what's out there right now at the time of filming. This is April 10th. The Avata one is about $1,200 with the goggles. There's a good used market for FPV because it's not for everyone. So I would always recommend checking out the used marketplace first before you go out and buy a brand new drone. The FPV one is still available out there. It's around $1,300. The Mini 3 Pro is technically an FPV drone. You can use the goggles with it with the latest versions of DJI Fly. It's a bit convoluted because you have to have a controller and the drone, or you need an RC2 with the goggles. There's a bit of a pairing process involved, and it doesn't support full manual mode. So it'll support simulated FPV. And what happens is the gimbal will rotate as it's flying. So you'll get a roll in your screen, but the drone itself is actually only flying in GPS mode.
But if this is something that interested you, but you didn't want to sink $1,200 into the Avata, you could potentially just purchase the goggles.
Yeah.
And if you had the RC, you could get it hooked up. And then if down the road you wanted to buy the Avata, you wouldn't need to rebuy the goggles.
Yeah, exactly. The other side of it is the goggles do offer. DJI's always offered a pair of goggles for GPS drones for quite a few years. Like they started with the Phantom, they had the big white goggles. It gives you an option to see the screen in super bright daylight without having to have like a dedicated, very high brightness screen or something else. The other side of this is, and I've done this actually on a paid job, it was a couple $1,000 job. We needed to fly indoors in a very high risk environment. It was very, very expensive equipment, and it involved flying down a conveyor belt with the drone providing an FPV perspective, because they wanted to like follow the path of the product being produced and going through the conveyor. And in order to do that, I actually used the Mini 3 Pro because it was going to do the least amount of damage if it hit something. It's the lightest drone. And I put it into FPV simulated mode and flew it in FPV. So as you fly forward and then add a yaw to the drone, the camera would roll left or right. So it simulated all the FPV flying we'd been doing for that video outdoors. It had that natural transition to it, and we were able to kind of mix it together. I don't think that footage ever saw the light of day because there was a pretty heavy NDA on it, unfortunately. But moving away from the DJI ecosystem, we kind of brought up iFlight as another really good option just because they're building drones that are, again, ready to fly, packaged drones using pretty robust variety in the way the systems work, and also their flight controllers are already tuned, because another side of building your own drone, you have to tune your flight controller yourself. And you might be able to find tunes to start with, but that means like adjusting the feedback system in it and the rolls and the PIDs and everything else. So it's going to affect that. So the iFlight Defender 25 is a sub 250 gram.
Yeah. So just the one thing about the iFlights, and I noted it here, they out of the box, they don't come with controllers or goggles, but they would probably most likely be compatible with something like this.
Yeah, you can change the module out. So there's ELRS, there's Crossfire, there's a bunch of different protocols that these controllers can be configured to run, or you can even run DJI's own control protocol called O3 or O4.
Yeah, and these all use, the cameras in them are DJI cameras with DJI transmission, so it's not it's not completely out of the DJI space, but the O3 camera is designed for FPV flying, and a lot of scratch-built drones actually use that.
Yeah, and those are compatible with the Avata goggles and upward. You can you can pair it to multiple camera units.
So Ian was mentioning that the Defender is a sub 250. On the next slide, I just highlighted all of the aircraft on this screen that are sub 250.
Just to give you an idea what the main difference is, Helion 10 is a 10-inch propeller. So it's meant for like those mountain surfing, very long range flights. Again, you got to watch out. Like it's very easy to go beyond visual line of sight with these because they're so big and the performance is so high. You need to have a plan for either extended visual line of sight or a remote visual observer to be in compliance with the Canadian laws.
But just looking at it, it's like a similar form factor to the FPV, but it's got bigger props than the FPV.
But that's called a dead cat layout, the way the legs are spread out backwards. It's a more traditional kind of surfing. And the way the arms are set up actually has a difference in performance. So
Yep. So these are all the micro drones. So the tiny Whoop there, that's one of these, and it's $200. And then I also put in the Centurion 8. That's one of their newest models, iFlights, and it's huge, and it's got 8 props. And just to show you what the extent of the industry can be.
yeah, and that was meant to fly either like a red Komodo body, which is about this big, or a Blackmagic box camera. Like it's a cinema camera system.
Yeah,
This
so
was-
it's a substantial piece of hardware.
Stay tuned. I know DJI is teasing something like it's April 10th. We don't really talk about unreleased stuff, right, until it's out. I would say if I were a betting man, it would probably be a second generation Nevada. So I will have a follow-up video about it. We'll do a breakdown. We're going to try and get our hands on one as quickly as possible as well and do some training about it because FPV is near and dear to my heart for flying. It's what I'm most excited about when it comes to drone flying because it's so dynamic. Thank you so much for watching another episode of Coastal Drone Weekly Live. If you're watching this on YouTube after the fact, please be sure to like and subscribe and share this video if you found it relevant and helpful. There's going to be more like these coming along down the road. If you want to see these live, community.coastaldrone.co is where you can sign up and join us. And otherwise, just be sure to hit that notification bell so you get notified every Sunday. There'll be another video coming out just like this one. Thanks again, and we'll see you soon.